Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week's first question comes to me from Troubleshooter 125, who asks, what would you like to be doing in 10 to 15 years? It's clear that you are very much in your element with the YouTube environment, and I know that you are very interested in film production and in writing for film or perhaps TV. I presume you would like to be involved in screenwriting or in writing, period, for a larger audience, and from where I sit, you have the chops, so what would you like to do downstream from YouTube? Well, thank you for the compliment, for saying I have the chops. I appreciate that. I hope that's true. Right now, I would just like to do a better job at doing YouTube, to reach a larger audience, to make better videos, to continue the production schedule that I've kind of set up for myself. I think it's working very well. In the long term, yeah, obviously, I would love for film production to become a thing that I could rely on as a source of income. I would love for the production company that I work for, Neon Reel, to continue to grow and to become something that we could actually call a career and not just something that we're spending a lot of our free time on. That would be great. That's probably the dream, if I have to, pick one thing, is for the film company to become something. Wilco 4009. How are we supposed to solve the problem of not enough women representatives in politics in most of the industrial world? Is the problem just cultural? Also, for underrepresentation of women in business, is that also cultural? It is my opinion that we can't do any legislation about these two things, but we could try to motivate women to run for office through motivational speeches, etc. And also waiting for the older generation to die off. They tend to be more sexist and hold seats of power. Yeah, I actually think you're really onto something here. I agree with you. A lot of the things I spoke about in my response to the feminism question in the last episode of this series are cultural problems. You can't just pass a bill that will establish, as a statute that there have to be a certain percentage of women in representative government. I mean, or a certain percentage of women in the business world or whatever. Those are cultural things. Those things have to change and evolve over time. And the best thing you can do is to continue to encourage positive change, to encourage women to enter those fields, to encourage the women already in those fields to pursue advancement, to pursue promotion, and encourage the bosses in those fields, be they men or women, to make sure that they're giving women a fair shake when choosing who to promote, who to hire, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to take time. It has taken time. Today, women in the workplace, career women, are considered just a normal part of our society. But 50 years ago, a woman who had a job was looked at as someone who was just trying to get by until she got married, and then she could quit the job and just be a wife and a mother full time. And that was the prevailing attitude. That was, back in the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. And now that attitude is largely looked at as passé, as anachronistic. But that didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. Next question from a username I have no idea how to pronounce, Chris Stein. It's one of those, I bet. Anyway, Steve, I've watched all your You Had to Ask videos and I still don't know what you do for a living. What is your day job and do you enjoy it? Actually, believe it or not, right now this is my job. Up until about a year ago, I used to write, do article writing. And if you really bust your ass and do article writing, you can make a decent sort of low income. But for the last year or so, I've been focusing entirely on the YouTube channel, and it has yielded results. I'll just say that by focusing entirely on it and doing as much quality work as I possibly can, it has yielded results. I mean, I have 10 times more subscribers and views, etc. now than I had at this time last year. So, and the only reason I'm able to do that is because my wife has a good job and is able to be the primary provider for the household. If not for her and if not for that, I would not be able to do this, at least not as often and not as well as I would like to think that I do it. So yeah, actually, you're looking at the day job. Great Goat on Fire. Steve, if you and Neon Reel Entertainment had to make a movie adaptation of a video game, if you want an example, let's say Deus Ex, how would you guys do it? follow the games super close, take a lot of liberties with the story, or try to make something new inspired by the games? Also, why do you think that so many video game movies turn out so bad? To answer that last question first, I think it might be because the form of a video game is so different from the form of a film. I mean, video games borrow a lot from films nowadays. They spend much more time creating a narrative, trying to have a story and characters that you'll care about. So when you're playing the game, it's not just about scoring points and getting to the end of the level. It's about, you know, seeing what happens to the people that you're playing as. But ultimately, video games are essentially an active pastime. You're playing a video game. You're involved. And a movie is essentially a passive experience. You're sitting there and you're watching the movie, and you're allowing the story to be told to you. You're not participating in it. And to try and transition from one to the other can be challenging, especially when you're going from a video game which is designed to be active and the story is crafted with the idea of trying to involve the player who is actually participating, and then going to a movie where the idea is to present a drama to the audience, and the audience doesn't get to participate. They just have to sit there and watch, and you still want them to be invested in it, and you still want them to care what happens, but they don't get to play any part in what happens. They just have to sit there. So that could be a challenge. And as far as adapting video games into movies, what I just spoke about is a challenge you'll have to navigate. But adapting things in general, I think, is it has to be, like I've said previously, source material can't be treated as scripture. It has to be treated as source material. The master you must serve as a filmmaker, whether you're doing your own original story or whether you're adapting someone else's story from whatever source, the master you must serve is the movie that you're making. And if the movie that you're making, if you can make a really great movie by sticking close to the original story and not making changes, that's great. If you have to make changes in order to make a better movie, then that's what you have to do, and you can't blink an eye about that. And you can't feel some sort of loyalty to the source material. You have to make your movie as good as it can possibly be. And you also have to inject some of your own point of view, your own talent, your own style into it. One of the worst things you can do with an adaptation, to me, is to make it too flat, to make it too close to the source material. That's why I really don't like, and a lot of people like them. I don't think they're very good. The DC Comics animated direct-to-video movies that are directly adapted from comic book stories, specifically Batman Year One. Batman Year One is probably the worst example, or the best example, of an adaptation that just makes no changes and adds absolutely nothing to the material. It's just like they took the comic book pages and just animated straight from those. Like they used the comic as a storyboard, and it just feels flat. It just doesn't feel. I don't see why it was made. I don't see why it exists. If it's going to be exactly like the comic, I don't see why it exists. And that's something else that you have to do when you're adapting something into another form. I mean, obviously, if you're adapting a popular property, the reason it exists is commercial. Someone bought it, now they want to make a movie, so people will pay to see the movie. That's the real reason. But artistically, it has to justify its existence. There has to be a reason within the story, within the style, something about the film that justifies it being made and you watching it. And that's always going to be a challenge. And something that you have to, as the adapter, as the director or the writer adapting it, you have to bring something of yourself to it. And that's always going to be a challenge no matter what you're adapting, whether it's a video game or whether it's a novel or whatever. Here's one from OneClown Shoe. Steve, what did you think about the Marvel versus DC, DC versus Marvel comics, and which would you rather see turned into a live-action movie? Those mentioned or Marvel Zombies? I can't actually honestly answer that question because I haven't read any of the Marvel Zombie stuff. It hasn't interested me. I like zombies and I like Marvel comics, but the two together they didn't make me run out to the comic book store. So I don't know. I do remember the Marvel versus DC stuff when the first time they did it back in the 90s. and I read a little bit of it. I read some of the amalgam stuff that they did afterwards, where the characters sort of were smashed together, and they did like Dark Claw, the combination Batman Wolverine one. Some of it was interesting. None of it I would call like really good, but it was interesting and it was cool just for a fanboy factor to see DC and Marvel cooperating and doing stuff. And in the DC versus Marvel miniseries, it's cool to see like Superman and Captain America fighting each other, and Batman and Spider-Man, and I mean it was cool. There was sort of a cool factor, but story-wise, I don't think any of it was very good, and I really wouldn't be interested in seeing any of it adapted into a movie. I would rather see. Let's get like a really good new Superman movie first. Let's see if Man of Steel is any good. Let's see if the next batch of Marvel movies, the sequels to Captain America and Thor and etc., are good before we start thinking about doing Marvel versus DC. Honey Ace 427 heard this point during your recent web chat. Hate the religion, not the religious. Is that the skeptic version of hate the sin, not the sinner? Honest question, I'm not being sassy. Well, it's a goddamn good thing. Yeah, actually, it is sort of the skeptic version, I suppose. And I like that comparison because it's useful, and it reminds me when I say things like hate the religion, not the religious, that I want to avoid the hypocrisy of so many people who say hate the sin, love the sinner, when it's clear that they don't really love the sinner either. So to make that comparison as a reminder that when I say hate the religion, not the religious, that's what I have to be doing. I can't just say that and then talk shit about how all religious people are stupid or all religious people are of low character or whatever. The criticisms have to be of the religion, and it's important not to treat people as monoliths. I firmly believe, because I see examples of this in my everyday life, of people who are close to me, who I like and admire very much, who are Christians, who are incredibly sharp, intelligent people, who just happen to believe something that I find to be utterly irrational and absurd and preposterous. And I don't think that you can say, well, because a person believes in the claims of Christianity, that they are fundamentally an irrational person. That is obviously not the case. You can believe something that is itself irrational. You can suffer from what I think you have to call a delusion without being, in general, a delusional, irrational person. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And when I say things like it's important to direct your attack at the religion and not the religious, that's what I'm talking about. And that comparison to the sin and the sinner is important, because many religious people that I know who say that, who will say, oh, hate the sin, not the sinner, don't really practice that. It's important to me, as someone who is not religious and who criticizes religion and the effects that it has on people, to avoid that kind of hypocrisy. Terry James, what are your thoughts on Terry Gilliam's criticism of Steven Spielberg's films? I assume you mean what Terry Gilliam said in an interview about how I think he was comparing Spielberg to Kubrick, and he said that the Spielberg's movies all have happy endings. They all have reassuring endings, reassuring answers. I agree with him. I mean, I like movies. I tend to favor movies that don't give you the reassuring, easy answer at the end, that don't make sure that everything is tied up in a nice little bow at the end, that leave you with questions, that leave you feeling a little unsettled or a little challenged. I mean, I love movies like that. But at the same time, I'm not going to say that that's a reason to not like Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg is a filmmaker in a great American cinematic tradition, and indeed a great world cinematic tradition that you could call romantic cinema. He is a romantic filmmaker, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like realistic cinema. I like art movies. I like movies that challenge, that question. I love Stanley Kubrick. He's maybe my favorite filmmaker ever. I love movies that force you to pay attention, that force you to think, that force you to be patient and to watch what the filmmaker is showing you. I love movies like that. But I also love romantic cinema. I love 2001: A Space Odyssey. I also love Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I mean, I think you can like both. Do I favor one over the other? Sure. I tend to favor the more challenging, less reassuring, less pandering filmmakers. But that that doesn't mean I can say anything really negative about Steven Spielberg, because he's obviously an incredibly talented filmmaker, and that type of film that he makes is, there's nothing wrong with that at all. New Nauno 001. Steve, with the exceptions of Batman 1966, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises, you have disliked or hated all the Batman movies. Out of curiosity, how would you rank them from worst to best? Just theatrically released movies, of course. Yeah, I do kind of have a negative opinion of most of the Batman movies, don't I? Okay, let's see if I can do this. Just off the top of my head, don't hold me to this, but we'll start with the worst and we'll end with the best, okay? So, first, worst, got to be Batman and Robin, then Batman Forever, then Batman Mask of the Phantasm, then Batman Begins, then Batman 1966, then The Dark Knight Rises, and then The Dark Knight. Yeah. I remember when Dark Knight Rises first came out, I was still sort of flush with it, and I said that I liked it better than The Dark Knight. Now that I've had a year to think about it, I think I can dial it back to number 2 and put The Dark Knight back on top. I just think The Dark Knight is a better movie, but I still overall think The Dark Knight Rises is a really, 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 really good movie. So we'll put it at the number 2 spot. Dark Knight is number 1. Oh, wow. I'm still not used to that. Anyway, okay, so you know what that means. That means that it is time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Okay, here we go. Radical Bacon, what was your first experience with alcohol? I was a glass of wine that my dad gave me when I was, I think, 13 to celebrate the performance of the Batman play that I wrote for a class project that I mentioned in the last episode. Simon Dodd, nice video. Which baseball team do you support? Please don't say the Mets. No, not the Mets, the Orioles. The Baltimore Orioles. Those are my guys. That's my team. Puckerings. Hey, Steve, who do you think would win in a fight between Batman and Snake Eyes? Batman. Snake Eyes might be the toughest G.I. Joe, but that's like saying you're the toughest guy at the fucking bakery. Bassbait, can this question be in the lightning round? No. Shamzors, why do you never answer my questions? Is it my... You know what, actually, Bassbait? Yes. Yes. Your question can be in the lightning round. Okay. Anyway, Shamzors, why do you never answer my questions? Is it because my YouTube account has such a stupid name? No, it's personal. Fewer Freyet, as to the hate that other people love question, what about Lord of the Rings? I expected you to hate those more than It's a Wonderful Life. That is such a good point. Yes, I completely forgot about the Lord of the Rings last week when I was asked, what do I hate that other people like? Lord of the Rings. God, I fucking hate that shit. That, you're right. I should have said that. I should have said that. David Landon, Steve, you are stuck in a time machine and must choose to go 200 years in the future or 200 years in the past. Which do you choose and why? I choose 200 years into the future. Why? Because I expect they will still have indoor plumbing in the future. And plus, think of all the great shows. Hey, that's it. Before I go, let me do a shout out. The shout out this week is long overdue. It's to a really great channel, The Atheist Hub. The Atheist Hub is dedicated to doing the sort of thing full time that I try to do once a week when I give these shout outs, and that is to promote up and coming undersubbed channels. The Atheist Hub is all about mirroring videos from new atheist YouTubers or atheist YouTubers that are undersubscribed and trying to get them out there and get them more exposure and a wider audience for their work. It is a great channel and a great thing that they're doing. All the guys involved in that. And the Atheist Hub is the shout out this week. Go to the Atheist Hub, subscribe, check it out. You see all kinds of interesting new YouTube atheists doing their thing. And all of it might not be your cup of tea, but I guarantee you, you will probably find somebody whose work you dig. You like how I said, I will guarantee you will probably? That's not really a guarantee, is it? Hey, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have a question for me, please leave a comment on this video and ask your question, because in order for me to do this next week, you have to ask. So ask me anything. Ask me a question about anything you want to hear me talk about, any subject. Nothing is off limits. I will try to answer as many of them as I can in the next video. So until then, have a good week. I will see you next time.